May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be ever mindful, dear Lord, my strength and my salvation. Amen. Would you please be seated? So as all the tryptophan worked its way through your system, all the white wine and mashed potatoes finally evened out your blood sugar and all that good stuff. It's been a slow, quiet weekend at Shepherd of the Hills. We had our potluck dinner last night, Italian food, and we ate, and finally about 9 o'clock the sheriff came and emptied the building. But it's been a lovely vacation time for some people. Many of our members are traveling, visiting family up north or down south. Because nobody really is from here, are they? In fact, the only person is little Cody, Aubrey Cody, who's the only person born here, and she's 3 years old. Or 4 years old. I want to talk to you this morning about one of the hard things of our Christian faith. Now that you're all sort of working off the calories and don't want me to be too energetic, I'm going to talk about one of the difficult parts of our Christian faith. The presence of evil in this world. Why do we have it? What does the Scriptures tell us? What can we understand by the fact that this world is not a very nice place in times and in various places? Well, before I get there, I want to tell you a little anecdote that occurred yesterday. I have a very good friend named Gavin Ashton. Gavin is my English friend. Gavin is central casting in Hollywood. If they wanted to have a stage English priest, would have picked Gavin Ashton. Gavin has hair, but little tufts that sort of stick up like this. He's been trying to grow the same beard ever since I met him 10 years ago, and it's still not quite visible. He's a retired chaplain to Queen Elizabeth. He's a professor at a university. He's a canon theologian at Chichester Cathedral, which is, I'm told, one of the nicer, more expensive parts of southern Britain. And he's now retired from all of that, and he's a writer, and he does various ecumenical things. And Gavin, now English priests don't get paid very much, but at least they get paid. So when they do travel, they have to save up for it. And Gavin had been invited this week to come to Paris and give a lecture at an interfaith conference of Christians and Muslims, Catholics and Anglicans, and he could bring his wife and they'd pay for the room for 2 of them. And in fact, they put them up on a hotel in the Champs-Élysées. Now, France is very far away from here, but not so far when you get on the train that runs you from, I think it's Waterloo Station all the way to Paris. And so they checked in and they had a lovely time. And on Saturday, Gavin got up early to go to an early morning mass at the English church in Paris. And Gavin is slightly eccentric, meaning he's completely normal in England, but if you saw him, you'd say, man, that guy's weird. So Gavin he and his wife, being English, had rented bicycles while they were in Paris to have the Parisian experience of getting around. And so Gavin is dressed up to go to early mass, and he's wearing his cassock, and he decides to be a little bit, well, I am in France, so he puts on his soutane. I don't know if you know what that is. It's that flat hat that French Catholic priests wear. And I can just picture the picture of Gavin. The bicycle's probably too small, so he's my size, so his knees are sticking out. He's going down the streets of Paris in the dark to go to early mass with this little flat hat on with the little chin strap holding it tight. And he comes back, and he gets back, and mass is wonderful, it's beautiful. And he heads back, and he's driving his bike ready to get back. And he comes around a corner into the Champs-Élysées, and he finds that there's a riot in progress. The far right and the far left have decided that today, Saturday morning, we're going to have a street fight on the Champs-Élysées. And Gavin rides his bike through the police line because he doesn't stop in time and finds himself between crowds of, I don't know what they're called, not the National Front, but the The far-right Frenchmen who detest all migrants and hate Jews and hate everybody. And then on the other side is the Antifa and the Islamist extremists. And here's a fat Englishman dressed as a Frenchman in between them. And he had to be rescued by the French policemen carry submachine guns. And he had to be rescued by with French policemen with all this armor and helmets and shields, grabbing this fat Englishman between and these crowds. In America, when we're mean to each other in political protests, we give each other hand gestures. In France, they throw things. They dig up the cobbles in the streets and they throw them. They throw rocks. They throw exploding bottles of gasoline at each other. The French are having their annual "Let's burn down the unpleasant parts of Paris." And so Gavin is rescued and he makes his way back, and his wife, let's go out and have breakfast on the patio of the hotel, and it's really unpleasant because the tear gas has basically closed off. So this is a time to remember. But Gavin's point was, boy, and he took all these pictures with his iPhone. And I wrote to him, I said, you are not a photographer for Life magazine. It is not your job to get between the protesters and take action snaps. And he said, well, at least it was fun. It made a memorable trip out of this. But his wife is basically having heart failure that her beloved husband is going to get killed in the riots in France. Get beaten up. These guys are holding these steel rods, the rebar, and they attack each other. In France right now, and it's not just the communists and the fascists, we also throw in the Islamist extremists. There are 3 or 4 groups of people battling each other. And being dressed as a French priest is not probably the way to attract friends from the Islamist extremists. It's a difficult world out there, folks. We may think America is having troubles. Friends, compared to the rest of the world, we have a wonderful country. We're not being murdered in our beds because we're a member of a different religion or a different tribe or a different class. We don't have to worry about riots on Fifth Avenue. We just have to avoid the giant Pillsbury Doughboy floating down. America, we're in a lucky place. A lot of people, though, are worried that there's a degree of fear among our own population that is very high. Now, you could say it's reasonable or unreasonable, but a lot of people are scared about the future. You go to Europe, you go to Africa, you go to different parts of the world, and they are very scared of the future. There's no control. There's no certainty. You got the Nazis and the communists and the Islamists, and who else do you have who's going to attack you? It's a difficult world. It's the world that John wrote about in his book that we started today, the book of Revelation. Now, it's not the revelation of John, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ to John. John is the author of this book, but he recounts visions he has of Christ talking and speaking to him. It's the final book in the Bible. It's the book that most preachers avoid at all costs, except unless for the occasional priest you'll come across him who are hams. They have, I am the Alpha and Omega. They sort of ramp up their volume of their voice, and they basically make it a Hollywood show with these wonderful sounds. But they really don't go deep into what's going on in the book of Revelation. Why is it more than just scary images or confusing numerology? Well, what is it about? First, this book starts out from John to the 7 churches in Asia, which is, frankly, for scholars, a little annoying. Because, see, Paul starts out from Paul, the apostle. And all the letters sort of say, I am this Paul, I am this person, I am this Peter, But John is John. Is he John the disciple? John the author of John's Gospel? Is he any old Juan, Dick, or Harry? I don't know. We don't know who he is. He just says his name is John to the 7 churches in Asia. At least he was well known enough to those churches that he didn't have to say who he was. So we can assume he was a leader of those churches. Now, Asia, that goes from what? Hanoi to Tokyo to where? No. Asia in that time was a specific province of the Roman Empire. It's like saying Pennsylvania. It's a large area, but it's a defined area. It's not a continent. And there were certainly more than 7 churches in Asia. We have 7 listed in the book of Revelation, and each one tells a different story. But was he just writing to these 7 in particular? And you notice this book is full of a lot of 7. There are 7 trumpets, and 7 angels, and 7 seals, and 7 scrolls, and 7 plagues. 54 times. Lexicons are wonderful things. 54, because I can count, 54 times we have this number 7. We have the 7 spirits. Now 7 is, for you and to us, most of us today, numerology is like astrology. It's, well, unless you're into stock market picking. Then you go into charting and all sorts of oh, this and this and this, and this number means that, and that means that. In the Jewish world, in the Greek world, numbers had meanings and mystical meanings, and the number 7 had a specific, powerful meaning for the Jewish mind. 754 times, I think, 732 times. You've got to keep the numbers right. 7 appears in the Bible. There were 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine when Joseph was in Egypt. And Jericho, the army of Israel, marched around it 7 times. There were 7 times Naaman was dipped into the river Jordan to be cleansed. There were 7 petitions in the Lord's Prayer. Jesus had 7 statements from the cross. Now, where does all this come from? It comes from the 7 days of creation. For in the Jewish mind, the 7 is completeness. So when John writes to the 7 churches in Asia, he's not writing to 7, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but to the whole complete variety of Christian churches in Asia. Here are 7 representative churches that represent the different types of Christians in this province. So John introduces himself, and they know him because he doesn't have to go into great detail which John I am. And he's writing to these different churches, and what time and what place and what is the environment, what is the context in which he's writing. Well, first off, what is he doing on the island of Patmos? It's 8 by 10 miles. It hasn't grown much since that time. It was a place of exile. It was a place where the Romans sent people to administrative exile. They didn't want to kill them, but they wanted them out of the way. And so they would basically send them to these inhospitable, rocky, it's like going to Okeechobee, middle of nowhere places that you will be lost forever. So John, by the government, has been exiled to Patmos. Now scholars tell us that John was writing shortly after or during the reign of Nero, the Roman Emperor. Nero began and intensified the persecutions of Christians that began under his uncle Claudius. Nero blamed the Christians for his malfeasance in Rome for the fire that almost destroyed the city, and you had the images. Think back to the stories you've heard about the Christians being fed to the lions and martyred in the Colosseum. That began under Nero. And when Nero died, the Roman world fell into civil war. Various generals vied for power. Vespasian and Titus and all these different people are fighting for power. And in 70 AD, the siege of Jerusalem begins, culminating 2 years later in the total destruction of the temple in the Jewish world. So in the midst of Nero's persecution, we now move into civil war. We have, who is the emperor this week? 72, I think, was the year of the 4 emperors. 4 generals, one after another, taking power and then being deposed in bloody civil war. And John has been sent in exile. And so he's writing to Christians who are living in an environment that is totally out of control. They can't control their environment. Who am I loyal to? Which emperor this week? If I say I'm a Christian in public, will that get me killed? Why would God allow this? If God is God, he's going to make everything sunshine and roses. Instead, we're living in times where the world seems to be coming to an end. We stepped in between a line of fascists and communists and Islamists, and we're standing there dressed in a funny outfit, people throwing rocks at us. Lord, help us know what's going on. This is the context of the book of Revelation. So John is writing to the churches in Asia to give them his vision that he had of when Christ spoke to him, but also to give them an understanding why is the world the way the world is. Well, John's, after the introduction, he goes on to say, John to the 7 churches which are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is, and who was, and who is to come. Grace and peace. Now, in the ancient world, grace was the Greek word for, howdy, Alan, how you doing? Grace be with you. Charis. It didn't mean anything special. It was just what you said to people. And in the Jewish world, what did you say to people? Shalom, Kim, how are you? Did it mean anything? No. And saying grace and peace was, if you ever go up to Quebec and you walk into a store or a restaurant and they don't know if you're a real Frenchman or an Englishman, they'll say hello, bonjour. They push the two together. And then once you respond in which language, if you speak English, they ignore you. And if it's French, they'll you'll twaddle away. So on one level, grace and peace is a Greek word, hello, bonjour. But John is, as did Paul and Peter, are seizing these words and Christianizing them. Grace comes from God, and the grace of God brings you peace, and that's what I want for you. I write to you, and that grace comes from he who was, who is, and shall come again. Jesus Christ. Christ, who was at the right hand of God at the very beginning of creation, who came into this world, who was, who is, who was in the past tense, who is in the present tense, and who will be again in the future. That Jesus wishes you grace and peace, not just hello, how you doing? He wants you to know joy. And it continues by John ramping it up, becoming all airy-fairy. And he lists 7 attributes of God. The firstborn from the dead. Oh, what else do we have? Ruler of the kings of the earth. He who made us to be a kingdom of priests, who loves us, who freed us, so on and so on. He's sort of getting all airy-fairy and taking it up a notch and being all spiritual. And then he gives us whiplash. Because this guy who's done all these things, you're going to see him. Every eye shall see him, because behold, he's coming in the clouds. This is moving from figurative, allegorical, high theological language to you. We're going to see him. This stuff is real. So if you haven't had whiplash yet, you're getting it. He's jerking you up. He's jerking you down. And then he concludes with, I am the Alpha, the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. Now this is where a certain sort of priest, and you may know him, sort of drops his voice an octave or 2 and sort of riffs off of, I am the Alpha, the Omega. Because, you know, I've got a stole with an A and that Omega symbol on it. And it's something that we've all heard about, but frankly, it's the least important part of this whole passage. It's the most memorable because you hear it again and again. Because what John is saying is the language of God begins with the letter A and ends with the letter Omega, the alphabet, and that alphabet is Jesus Christ. The only way you can talk about God the Father is through the language of Jesus Christ. This is what Alpha and Omega means. That God is the beginning and the end of language and meaning and understanding, and it is only through Jesus that you can get to God. Where the meat of this is in the airy-fairy parts. Because John says in describing Jesus, Jesus is the King of kings and rulers of rulers, ruler of rulers. And you who believe in him are a kingdom of priests. Two very important statements. First off, John is saying that God in Jesus Christ. Now, what do we know about Jesus Christ? We hear in the Gospel of Matthew, all power on heaven and earth has been given to Jesus by God the Father. And we know throughout the Old Testament, we hear in the book of Daniel, that the Lord makes and unmakes kings and rulers. The rulers of this world are there because God has placed them there. God has placed bad people in power. Adolf Hitler. Yet those people are there not because they're decent, wonderful, lovely people who got the job because they're sweet, but in God's mystery of salvation. Evil is allowed to exist in this world. So what John of Patmos is saying in this description of who Jesus is, he's basically saying, friends, we live in a messed up world. But just remember that it is God who put Vespasian or Alba or Nero, whoever is emperor, in charge this week. And they may be gone next week. And somebody worse may come and somebody better may come. But at the end of the day, God is supreme. You are a kingdom of priests. Why is he saying that? Because he, their priest, their person between they and God, the person that they relied upon to help them, is not with them anymore. He's been sent into exile by the Romans. But they don't need him to know Jesus Christ, because the role of a priest in the Jewish world, I'm not saying we're all members of the trade union now, where we each get a little piece of white plastic and get to sweat. But you have no need of anybody to stand between you and God the Father except Jesus Christ. You are that priest in the temple in Jerusalem, where the priest stood before God the Father behind the Holy of Holies, the curtain, and acted for the Jewish people. You, as an individual believing Christian, are now that priest in your own right. You don't need me. You don't need John. You don't need the Pope. You don't need any of these people to know Jesus. You need us for the ancillary things, to teach and to preach and to celebrate the sacraments and to help order the lives of a working community. But we do not stand, those who are presbyters, to use the official term. We are not between you and Christ. That is you and Christ. And you stand before him, before God the Father, with only Jesus at your side. Not me, not your mother, not John of Patmos. And John is going into this airy-fairy theological stuff in the middle of crises. What is he saying? What can we take away from this? Friends, the questions we have about the injustice of this world, about evil, they did not happen with Adolf Hitler. They have been there from the very beginning. And what has been shared time and again is that, folks, my kingdom is not of this world. This world is going to run its course. The Lord has put these people into power, and he will bring them out of power. Sometimes he will use their evil for ultimate good. Other times, their evil will not seem to make any explanation or reason to us. I can remember in 1989, I was a young theological student. I went to a meeting of the Student Christian Movement. It's an international group of young people. And at that meeting, something happened all the way off in China. And that was when the Tiananmen Square revolts were taking place. And I remember talking to the Chinese theological students, Christians, who were so excited because it looked like it was going to happen. Communism was going to fall. It's been falling in Eastern Europe. The Czechs and the East Germans have gone, and within a year the Soviet Union would be gone, and it is now China's turn. And we can all, I think, remember the photo of the man standing before the Chinese tank in the middle of Tiananmen Square, the main square in Peking. But what we don't see is that tank kept going and ran over the guy. And that moment of Chinese life was crushed. How many years ago was that? 30, 40 years ago? China is still under the oppression of a one-party state. And I can remember sitting with these young Chinese men, they were all men, crying because they were trying to understand why God would allow this evil. Because they knew when they would go back to China, they would be arrested. Some would be martyred. I've never met a single one of them. I don't know their fates. But they all basically came to the point, it was not in God's time for democracy and peace and faith to come to China. And we just have to understand that we're not going to understand. And friends, this is what I mean by one of the hard things about the Christian life. Why do people we love suffer with illnesses? Why do our children or our spouses suffer addictions? Why do these bad things happen to us? And why do great, wonderful things seem to happen to the nastiest people? Can't answer that question. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, asked that same question. And let me get the words right, because I don't want to mangle it. Paul says, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways!" Romans chapter 11. It's not just you who are asking these questions. It's not just me. The Apostle Paul asked the question, how inscrutable are the ways of God? But what we are called to do is not come up with the right answer as to why, but how to live in the now. And that is to love our neighbor, to be faithful. I know this is an awful word, but to build character in the face of suffering and loss. To hold fast and trust in God. John of Patmos is telling a persecuted society of Christians not to worry, all will be well. Now, when my mother-in-law does that, I'm going to strangle her. But she's right. My worrying is not going to advance the ball 1 yard down the field. My worrying, my getting mad, my saying it's unfair is not going to change a darn thing. My standing up, going back to work, loving my neighbor, living in this world according to God's faithful rules and love, that will change them. Maybe not bring down communist tyrannies or fascist dictators. Certainly not according to how fast I'd like it to happen. But friends, change happens with each of us, one by one, bit by bit, changing the world in which we live. Be faithful. Don't be afraid to ask these why questions. Don't ignore them either. No, this is something that we as Christian people have been dealing with from the very beginning. The Apostle Paul, John of Patmos, the disciples all asked this question again and again, and not one of them had an intellectually or a satisfying answer. What they were taught instead was to trust. Obey Jesus. Put your focus on him. Soldier on in the midst of adversity. Oh, it's hard words. I want candy before dinner. I want it now. Sometimes we can't have the candy till after dinner. I know it's a silly way of describing it, but when you break it down, that's what we're talking about. When do we want the good stuff? We want it now.
most things in